Tabletop will start after the following messages.
Are you looking for something comfortable to wear and keep your brain warm while playing tabletop games? Daily Dose of Yarn makes handmade, customized beanies for all of your style and comfort needs. She can even help you with a custom beanie to represent your favorite character. Check out Daily Dose of Yarn on Instagram and Etsy to order your new favorite beanie today.
Welcome back to another episode of Tabletop. Today we have a really great guest. Basil Wright is a writer, translator, TTRPG designer, and sensitivity consultant in the game space. They work with authors and designers as a consultant and are also working on long-term projects like the translation by hand of the Odyssey into African American vernacular English. Basil Wright, welcome to Tabletop.
Hey, Nick, happy to be here. Very excited.
Yeah, I am too. It's so great to have you. Just to start us off, for those who don't know what a sensitivity reader or consultant is, can you talk a little bit about what you do and what kind of services you offer?
Yeah, certainly. So as a sensitivity reader / consultant, what I do is clients reach out to me saying that, I have this piece that I'm working on. It could be, like a D&D adventure. It could be a novel. I've done a few picture books. Those are always fun. I've been getting more for children's books. It's really cute and really heartwarming to see as well, the
That's
dedication
awesome.
to inclusivity and trying to make things, as sensitive as possible. So basically
Right.
the client reaches out to me saying, hey, I have this piece. Can you review it based off these areas? On my website, I have my areas of expertise listed, but there are also areas that aren't listed that I also do cover, but I didn't want to overload the website. So I always tell people, even if you think that maybe, this won't work out, still email me because I might also know someone else who is really good in that area. So
Amazing, yeah.
they send me their work. I look it over. And sometimes when I look over a piece, there's no recommendations for change. They've done everything that I would have recommended. It looks great. Sometimes when I look over a piece, I point out, oh, hey, actually, you've somehow accidentally recreated colonialism. And I know that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you've done a colonialism, and that's not, I don't think that's your intent. And they were like, oh gosh, no. And so I was like, okay, well, here are some steps to not have colonialism based off of everything else you have going on, or just, sort of things like, okay, well, you shouldn't use that phrasing. Or I had one piece where I was like, well, this is a black woman. She wouldn't go to bed with her hair like that. And also because her hair, is in this style, you wouldn't be brushing it in the morning. You would just be touching up the edges, applying maybe some products. So just sort of pointing out some areas where, some changes could be made. I usually, depending on whether someone has hired me for just like a brief overview, just sort of, hey, am I going in the right direction versus, hey, really go through this piece. I also include, links to resources and guides and other documents of that variety to help point them in the right direction, or suggestions of things to read up on. I know probably some people think that like, oh, well, if you're a sensitivity reader, you just look at a thing and go, this is bad, and then you send it back and you're done. But there's actually a lot of work that goes into it. I spend a lot of hours taking the time to find resources to document, well, why does this need to be changed? Even if sometimes when it comes down to it, it's just, well, from my personal experience, as a queer person, as a black person, as a neurodivergent person, as a disabled person, this wouldn't actually track because reasons. Or sometimes it's, if it's like sort of like a fantasy element, to a certain degree, I will look at a work and say, well, within the lore that you've created and the internal logic, this doesn't actually make sense, and this actually has now created, a sort of like racist or a negative element, and I would recommend, moving away from that. That sort of edges a little bit into developmental editor territory, which I don't do.
Sure.
But if it still stays within, the areas that I have been hired for, or at least the areas that I know that I have that expertise in, I will at least point out, and I have at times recommended, okay, this section doesn't actually need a sensitivity reader. What you need is a developmental editor, and then
Right.
pointing them to a few databases where these editors can be found. So I do at least, I do try to help people out as much as I can.
Yeah, it sounds like you really do a huge breadth of work too. Everything from societal or systemic reading to cultural and sort of day-to-day sort of activities that you have insight into. It seems like it'd be like super valuable, especially for TTRPGs and game design. Like one of the questions that was really burning in my mind, because I've been thinking a lot about it recently, is that D&D, which is sort of the most popular of these games, does have a lot of history with kind of Tolkien-esque tropes and fantasy tropes that are kind of based on prejudices. And there's been a lot of discourse around that with the new release of products. Is there any sort of insight or advice you have for someone who's making their own homebrew setting to try to really consider when they're trying to build this sort of lore and stay away from some of those more problematic tropes?
Yeah, I would say, when making your own sort of homebrew, which is, as an aside, just something I also do outside of all that as a tabletop RPG writer myself. But, definitely reach out to, your community, to your friends. Hopefully, it's 2022. You don't have a completely homogenized set of friends
Yeah.
that you
Fingers
are
crossed.
able to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm working on this. What do you think? Like, I think like what's really beneficial is if those friends, in your community is willing, getting another pair of eyes on your setting. I think at this point, most of us know that we really should not be reproducing, bioessentialism, saying that, oh, because you're an elf, you can, I don't know, disappear into the trees and knowing your stealth is this many points, sort of things that are weirdly inherent because you're an elf or a dwarf or a gnome or what have you. And just sort of,
It's
definitely, I think like, I know I saw a tweet recently where someone was talking about how your own writing improves the more you read, and that definitely is, a step. Libraries are available. If you can't purchase all the books that you want, you can, read up on various areas, not just D&D, not just Pathfinder, not just, tabletop RPGs. Read academic articles, read books that have been put out about, the issues of racism, transphobia, homophobia, what we can do, how to move into an anti-carceral state, that sort of thing. Really try to read up on, the world around you. And I think that'll inform, especially if you're doing world building and starting from scratch, and as plenty of people of color have said previously, when you're making a fantasy setting, you don't have to put racism in it. You don't have to put, all the isms in it. It could just be a world where everyone, gets along, or maybe the biggest issue is just trade. This country is hogging all the resource because they want the monopoly. But even then, it's like you could make a world where there's no capitalism. So it's just, I think also like thinking critically about what you're making is important. Like take a moment after you've written something, give it a few days to rest, look at it again, and then think, are there any sort of biases that I've accidentally put into this work? Again, have I done a colonialism?
Right. Oops, I've done a colonialism. One thing that I've always, one thing that I personally have thought about, because like you said, when I try to create a setting or I'm authoring some experience for a group that I'm running for, I really try to remove the things that might be triggering to a party member who has gone through something that I don't have as much of an insight into, and try to remove, like you said, the isms from a game so that people can kind of enjoy in a much freer way. But I've also always thought, like, there's been a conflict within me of, is this sort of denying the experience of folks at my table? And is this something that I'm actually sort of, whitewashing sort of experiences by doing that? Do you have any sort of insight into that sort of, I guess, thought that I had when it comes to like game design and storytelling?
Yeah, so actually just recently I read an excellent article by Tanya DePass, Cipher of Tyr on Twitter, who I recommend everyone should follow. She's amazing. That was actually talking about this exact subject. So I definitely do not want to paraphrase or co-opt what she was saying, but just it
Sure.
was the sense that, again, this isn't the sort of thing that has to be at the table. I generally speaking, I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where someone was really chomping at the bit to really have, it's like, yeah, let's put racism in here, or, violence against minorities or children or women or something. And,
Right.
I don't think it's like depriving anyone of like that opportunity, though it is always fun to dunk on like Nazis and racists and be like, you suck,
Yeah.
and, eat the
In
rich
this
and all
game, we
that.
exclusively punch Nazis.
Yes. I have designed this NPC for the sole purpose of being dunked on. It is Lord Dunkington. Yeah. Please dunk harder on him.
Yeah, exactly.
But, so I would say, like, I don't think anyone's being deprived of it. I think it's a conversation probably to have, like, with your table saying, hey, do you guys want this in here? Because if not, by default, I don't put this in here. And, there is a part in Tanya's article where she talks about how, ultimately, depending on, especially if you're a white person, you're not going to like really, you're definitely not going to fix racism by having this in your game, but you may not also like be able to really move the needle for like the group, especially because if playing an RPG, like if playing a role-playing game is what gets you to finally realize in 2022 that like people of color are people, that's a right. different conversation and so you need to do some hard thinking about why it took to this point, why it took media for you to realize, especially if you're a grown adult. If you're a child, that's one thing. I think there probably is an argument to be made about, gently coaxing like younger kids into like role-playing games so that they can have like a space to be able to explore themselves in the medium and everything. But like if you're, if it's you and your friends and you're all in your 30s, like how did you get to this point? And you're like, actually, you're right. They are people. And it's like, I don't think we're going to invite them back.
Yeah. Maybe we slowly end that Roll20 invitation.
Yeah, and have maybe if you're close enough, have a separate conversation of, hey, that you said some kind of odd stuff. Why did it take to this point?
Yeah, that's really insightful. I think I totally agree because I have a friend. Both of us have a theater background, and we were talking about this subject, and eventually he was just like, yeah, but if you're really trying to bring a lot of these sort of really hard, traumatic parts of real life into these games, then what you're really doing is making like an interactive theater piece rather than like a role-playing game to enjoy with your friends. So I think that's like really interesting, and I definitely will go check out that article. It sounds like everybody should. So one thing I would also love to talk to you about is, we've talked a lot about how your experience as a sensitivity consultant kind of gives you kind of a broad view on different pieces of media that come to you. But how does that change your relationship with game writing and playing?
I will say in terms of game writing, I think I am a bit more aware of like when I'm writing things. I'm thinking of like when every so often I write adventures that have a horror theme to them. And so when you're writing horror, you have to consider like, okay, yes, on the one hand, it should be spooky, but on the other hand, you definitely don't want to, reintroduce or like reproduce concepts that are harmful. There was recently a tweet by Imani Barbarin. I follow so many great people on Twitter. She's amazing. Also follow her. Talking about how people were going to the Amherst mental institution to stay the night, like some kind of exhibit, like it was like going to the carnival. And, and it has been, in games, I'm thinking like, like Call of Cthulhu. I don't know why my brain wanted to say Mysterium. That's the wrong game. But like Call of Cthulhu and like games that have like that whole sort of madness mechanic. And, there's been some great dialogue about how do you reconcile with that? How do you work with that? And, my own personal opinion is honestly, I don't think you need to make a game where like madness is a stat that's weird. I'm working on a game now where sleepiness is a stat, and like that's you have options is my point. Like when you're designing a game, there's there's no looming shadowy presence behind you demanding that you put this in here. I mean, unless you've made some kind of weird Faustian deal, in which case, that's rough, buddy. But no one is forcing your hands to the keyboard, making you recreate things. Like, every so often in the tabletop RPG sphere, there's some main character of the day where it's like, oh, they've redone bioessentialism or talking about race science or something, and I'm sure at some point I'm going to find someone talking about the shape of dwarf skulls or something weird.
Yeah, like this the dwarf phrenologists are really up and coming.
just real strange behavior. And it's just, I think, like, in terms of my own writing, I'm always like, okay, well, actually, wait, I think I've taken a misstep. Maybe I should go back and look at this again, because everyone has their own unconscious and conscious biases and things, because we live in a society and we've grown up, with different viewpoints being presented to us, especially in America. And, especially there's also, some internalized issues. I'm Black and Native American, so having to deal with all of that and making sure that, you're definitely not, I would say that I'm more mindful about those issues, but then sometimes just because you're just not aware of, or even just because you're not a part of that community, realizing that, oh, actually this is harmful. And I think also just, again, getting that feedback from others, being able to reach out to other people because they can point out, hey, actually, you might not be aware, but culturally this is this. And it's like, oh, okay. Which is why I'm always advocating, like, if you're making something, if you're writing something, get a consultant, find one. You might be lucky. Some consultants, depending on what you're doing, might work at a reduced rate. Some, and I'm not advocating for this, but some might work for free depending on what the situation is. Yeah. If the right opportunity came along and if it was like, for a good cause, I've definitely done reduced rates. I've reviewed things for friends on sort of like a trade basis where it's like, I'll look at this if you look at that, and, that sort of thing. But there's also a limit on that. You don't want to overtax someone. It's one thing to ask someone, hey, can you look over a couple of pages of my comic to make sure I've done this person's hair correctly, versus, hey, can you look at my 200-page RPG and review it for these issues for free, and return it within a week and a half. And it's like, no, we need to discuss monetary compensation at that point.
Yeah, just as a general note, as a fellow kind of consultant-ish person, as an actor and an artist, like, pay people when they do work for you.
On time and in full.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I saw on Twitter recently that really kind of blew my mind was that, and this isn't, I guess, for you to comment on, just as a crazy thing for everyone to be aware of that's out there. And if you are a player at these tables, then feel free to leave them. But there was a DM who treated a character whose strength stat was higher, but who was playing a female character, as being weaker than a man character that had a lower strength stat. So it was like this whole like issue with the bias of the DM, and like these things really manifest themselves in these games because a lot of the time we are kind of projecting the worlds that we see, or the way we see the world in our minds, out into these fantasy concepts. So it's always really, it's hard. So don't put yourself in that situation. But one thing I really latched onto when you were saying was like horror as a genre. It's something that I'm super fascinated with. I love that's like creating that sense of dread. I find it a really great way to engage with your group, because everyone kind of leans in those kind of scary situations, or trying to grasp at information that they're trying to figure out. But like you said, it's sort of a genre rife for missteps. Is there any sort of advice you can give people when they're trying to create in that genre specifically?
Yeah, I will say with the caveat that though I can write horror, and I do write horror an astonishing amount, my work, I prefer to write more joyful, happy, cozy things.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, I'm really good at writing horror. I think it's one of those things where it's, it's like that episode of Ed, Edd n Eddy where Double D is really good at playing, that instrument, what is it, like the steel guitar or something?
Yeah.
But he hates it. It's not that I hate horror, but it's just like, this is a skill I have, but I'd rather write about something a little cozier. But So I would say, definitely at this point, there are resources out there. I think if you Google, like, how to write horror, or even just like, horror stereotypes, like, definitely countless people have talked about it. The main ones are like, don't, portray mental illness in a negative way. Don't set your game in, a mental institution if you're not going to treat it with respect.
Yeah.
Just sort of, avoiding certain ableist language and terms. That's, sometimes that is something I do point out because other people aren't aware, or even just sometimes it's, English is not their first language. So they may be fully aware that in their language, you don't say these terms, but because you see them in media, you see people on the internet using it all the time, you think, oh, okay, well then this is the equivalent of this term that I know in my native tongue. And then it's like, no, actually, and they're like, I've never had a person, at least with ableist language, be like, well, actually, I want to keep it in. I have had, like, once someone who asked for, a sensitivity reading and then proceeded to argue on every single point that I made. And at that point, I was just like, well, you paid the money. So if you want to, you spent, X amount of money just to argue with someone. And,
right.
Ultimately, I'm not going to read whatever that is. So,
yeah.
But, and it's definitely, there are resources out there. There are people you can reach out to. I think if you, like, the main thing, especially when it comes to horror, is like to operate from, like, a place of good faith. Like, if you ask on Twitter, hey, I'm trying to write about X, or I'm working on something, and, does anyone have any resources about this? Generally speaking, human beings are kind and wanting to help. They'll give you resources. Where it becomes a problem is where, like, you read all the sources, you do all the stuff, and then you decide I'm going to keep it in anyway, or just don't even do any of that. Like that one website that did a review of Prey and was like, we're going to keep this offensive anti-indigenous word still in the article, even though we've been informed that it's, bad. And it's like, okay, so you just decided, it's like we investigated ourselves and found ourselves, innocent of all wrongdoing.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Actually, you need to engage with people where they're at, and especially, if people give you resources and it's just, a bunch of books to read, if you can, take the time to read at least some of them. A lot of books are available online. Some books have been summarized. If books aren't your thing, there have been plenty of YouTube videos of people analyzing horror, what works, what doesn't, the sense of dread. Watching modern horror can help. I don't watch horror movies. They give me the creeps, also because I have a blood phobia. So all that gore is like, no thank you. But, Nope recently came out, and that's, I don't know if you call that a horror, maybe a thriller. It's kind of horror. Thriller-esque, that sort of sense of like, well, what's going on? What's so creepy about it, the dread. One thing I do actually watch, though, is a lot of survival horror. And I think survival horror really touches on things, especially because they're video games, really touches on some areas that, like, you can work on if you're writing in the horror genre. Early Resident Evil, or even, Resident Evil Village, I think, was like a return to formula. I mean, I love Resident Evil 5, but we all know that, like, there's not much horror in punching a boulder and fighting a guy on a volcano. But that sort of, the lingering dread, especially thinking of Resident Evil 8, the dread of being in this village, not knowing what's going on, seeing traces that something has happened here, And I think also with horror, there also needs to be moments of humanity where you meet people, there's that hope, maybe that hope flourishes, maybe that hope dies. I'm thinking of, like, spoilers, I guess, for anyone who hasn't, done the early part of Resident Evil 8, but like when Ethan meets the survivors and they're in the house and everyone gets bodied but the last chick, and he's trying to save her. But, it's also this moment of dread because, logically you would think we need to get out of this building. It's on fire. We need to go. But for that character, it's her father who's been turned into a werewolf zombie. I'm not exactly sure what the deal is when they transform, but basically turned into a werewolf, and she's trying to reason with him. And Ethan's like, no, we have to go. And unfortunately, due to her hesitation, she doesn't, climb up fast enough, and he's holding on to her and ends up, she ends up dying. And it's like, there's also a bit of tragedy, I think, with horror, but like with that sort of tragedy, it didn't feel harmful or schlocky. It just felt like, well, this was a natural consequence because, from, a humanities standpoint, how are you going to leave your dad behind? This is your dad. Even if he's changed, maybe we can find a cure. Maybe we can keep him locked up in a cellar until we find a cure, something, or maybe he'll pull a Wesker and overcome and just be my new werewolf dad. So,
and that's like the best scenario, even just in like normal life.
Yeah. Like I thought it was interesting as like, but there's also in terms of horror, like in general, I know I'm talking a lot about Resident Evil and I'm sorry, but I was just thinking about it compared to 7, where, I watched someone play it I was watching with me and my sister, we watched someone play it and he was fine. But, the story and the gameplay of RE7 just, my suspension of disbelief just pretty quickly went out the window because Ethan is just, he's kind of a doofus. He's, I mean, and it makes sense. He's an everyman, trying to find his wife. But, there's, I follow, I'm subscribed to a YouTuber, Corey Kenshin, and he's a black man.
He's so good. He's so great.
He's so good. And so one of the things that Corey usually points out is, this is not a thing that a black person would do. And there's a lot of scenarios. And I think that's also something to consider when you write horror is sometimes, just due to the nature of horror and how media has done, you also have to ask yourself, is this something someone who is not white would do? Because I've seen some excellent horror where it's like, I think the best horror is where you don't find yourself thinking, boy, this is something only a white person would do. Instead being like, well, no, this is something anyone would do. And it's not the best of ideas, but it makes sense why you're doing it. But Ethan just kind of continually stumbles into traps and touch things he shouldn't, even things that are very clearly traps. I believe there's a scene also where like it's very clear if you tilt the camera down, there's like a bear trap on the ground and he still walks into it. And it's just so bizarre. It's like the man has no self-preservation or self-awareness to where it took me out of the horror and I found myself wishing that I was back in Resident Evil 5 punching that boulder instead of watching this guy kind of just sort of haphazardly crash through the setting and survive, but it was just, it was very, very strange. Contrast that to 8, where it's like less goofy, and the goofiest thing was like him getting his hand cut off and then he reattached it with some salve, which I was like, okay.
That's not how that works.
Yeah, I was like, that's, well, alright, it was actually kind of fun. It just reminded me of like, oh yeah, no, just put some Windex on it, or just, put this on it and you'll be fine. And it's like, I think we're gonna need something a little stronger than aloe, because that was my family's thing. It's like, oh, what's that? You're in pain? Let's just put a little aloe on it. You'll be fine. Go out to the backyard, go get the plant, and. But yeah, I think just like it's a fine line between balancing, something that's spooky and the dread in the sense, the actions that people would take with like, the suspension of disbelief, because I think especially with horror, people are willing to suspend their disbelief for a lot, because you've got werewolves, vampires, ghosts, hauntings, possessions, aliens, all sorts of things that aren't real, but we're like, I'm here with you in this space, in this fiction, I'm ready to do this and ready to watch or enjoy or play. But then sometimes, like, I think, like, especially with horror, like, you should not have you should not have your audience think, why haven't they left?
Right.
Like, one of the things that I think survival horror does really good is like, why haven't they left? Oh, the door disappeared, or the door is locked, or they're looking for their sister, or they're trapped, or they've been, knocked unconscious or something, and they need to find all these keys. Like, there has to be, like, a reason. But, like, especially if it's like, oh, I'm thinking of, like, the first Fatal Frame, where, to some degree, it makes sense why she's there, and why she can't leave. She's looking for her brother. But on the other hand, when you extrapolate that outwards, it's like, well, why did the brother go? Oh, he was looking for his professor. Okay, but for me personally, that's not a strong enough tie, especially in a place where the locals have said people have gone missing consistently. Like, I just would not have gone. But it wasn't enough for me to be like, okay, I'm no longer interested in this game. It's just, well, this was a poor decision, but as you go through the game, you learn about her brother's personality and the kind of person he is, so you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. It makes sense why he went in here after his professor, even if this was clearly a horrible idea.
Yeah, I think that it's so interesting what you said, where you have to sort of show the moments of humanity, and I totally agree with that. I think that what makes horror really successful, especially in interactive fiction, is the desire of the player to seek out those really nice moments of humanity and that feeling of sort of like overcome. And like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is usually like, hey, I get to reunite with my family, like in the case of Fatal Frame. Or in Resident Evil 8, it's sort of like I have to like reunite with my daughter and make sure that she's okay. And it's like a really actually like a very positive emotional impulse that we have as humans. So I think that is so right, that you have to really center your experience around a positive desired outcome, and then you just throw a bunch of obstacles. But another thing that I'm really interested to talk to you about is sort of your experience like playing all of these games and reading all of this media. The community in a lot of the like video games and TTRPG spaces specifically have really for a long time been dominated by white men. And do you see that changing, especially now, like you were mentioning, a lot of people who are writing a lot of thought pieces about this, and a lot of people like yourself in the industry now? Like, what excites you about the future of game design, and like, what do you see changing?
Yeah, so I would say that I think it's twofold. I do think that the environment for, games, for tabletop RPGs, I do think that it's changing. It definitely is. More of us, we have been here, we being, marginalized identities, and we will continue to be here and continue to make games. And, I think also, it's also been born out of, for a while there were just a bunch of crotchety people who were just like, well, I don't want, or like the people who are constantly whining about the combat wheelchair, and they're like, I don't want that in my game, and I don't know why this exists, and, why don't you just make your own game? And then like people of color have been saying for ages, we do make our own stuff, but then they're just like, I still don't like it. And it's like, not everything is for you, but this could be for you if you would, let your shriveled little heart get a little more blood into it and open yourself up to new opportunities. So I think, there's, I'm in plenty of servers that are POC only, and it's just, it's nice to have those spaces where, I don't have to worry about, oh, okay, I can talk about this and not have a bunch of white people asking me to clarify or asking me what that means. Or, I can just have this server and be like, hey, once again, I've had to tell someone to not say this anti-indigenous term. And they're like, yeah, I get that. That's weird. Like, I made a tweet about it semi-recently where I'm just like, hey, please stop saying the name of the enemy from Until Dawn. It's bad. It's bad. And most of the time people are like, oops, my bad, I'll just fix that. But I've also, outside of where that incident happened, but also just like on Twitter and in places in general, I've had some weird pushback. And it's like, are you being paid by some shadowy conglomerate to, are you like, do they pay you $1,000 every time you say it? Like, what is the resistance? Like, it's just, it's a little mind-boggling of just being like a simple, it'd be like a simple request of, hey, don't kick me in the shins. And they're like, no, I'm going to kick you even harder because you said not to. It's like, but you're hurting me. And it's like, I don't care. And I think that's what it comes down to for at least some group. But I think, overall, I also have seen like a lot of, white game creators being open to having, more marginalized identities, like, on their teams, developing more things, people reaching out for consultants more, being mindful. And, some people also just being like, this would be a really interesting thing to do. I'm not going to do it because it's not my identity, but, I'm putting this thought out here in the world for others to take up if that's what they want. And I'll support you and use, my influence to help boost this. And I think that is definitely one of the ways that, white people especially can be supportive. There are so many people of color, game creators and editors and writers and producers and everything. If you're looking for places to check out, Utopia, they do a lot of great actual play podcasts. People are always putting out games. I've put out a couple of games. I'm gonna put another one out later in just a little bit, but
we'll definitely come back to that in a second.
But there's Utopia, there's we need diverse games, conversely we need diverse books, just sort of reaching out to those areas and find, they're out there. Like it's
Yeah.
not that hard to find them. It's just,
Yeah.
if you don't want to put in the work. But I think definitely the landscape has changed. There's the I am POC and play tag, and you get to see so many different creators making wonderful, excellent things. I think
Yeah.
also, as a sign that like things are changing, I think it's the sequel to Horizon Zero Dawn, the
Yeah.
sequel of that, and they had a black character, and for once her hair actually looked like braids. Because
Yeah.
the thing that black people have complained about for ages is
Yeah.
our hair does not be looking right in these video games, or the only option you have is like either shaved head, afro, and horrible clumpy dumpy braids, and it's like, oh, you actually did get some black people to work on this, to look at it, to make it look right, like pretty much like a guaranteed way to make your game more interesting is to actually have more non-white hairstyles.
For real. I mean, like, I recently played all the way through, or most of the way through, it's a very long game, Elden Ring, and there's only like one hairstyle that is sort of like a black hairstyle, and it is not a flattering one.
Yeah, that's.
And I was like,
that's
come
what I
on,
heard.
man, that sucks.
Like, that's the thing too. It's like you have like this, AAA budget, but you just decided not to. But there's like 11 styles of like long hair, or like ponytails, or like half shaved, undershaved, just sort of. But it's like, okay, but where are my locks? Where are my twist outs? Where are my, afro puffs? Not an afro, but like afro puffs. Where's all of this and that, and where's the option to put this on or take this off or change this, or even just at the basic, why, like especially in a lot of games still, and I think this is something that like, game devs need to be mindful of and work on, why do the people be looking so ashy though? It's like, oh yeah, no, we got a skin tone selector, you can make your, dark skinned character, and it's like, no, I can't, because I don't know what you did, but I look like I've been rolling around in dust or dirt, looking like some kind of weird sort of zombie, but not quite right. Like, it's like, oh no, but we did it. Isn't that great? And it's like, no, please fix this. Like, actually, like a lot of tweets usually say, it's like, have you looked at a black person? Have you taken photos of a black person? Like, that's like, there are so many resources out there and guides and just stock free, photos of people of color that you could look at to make sure that you're not accidentally, creating problems. And I think, sometimes there have been game devs who were like, actually, yes, I messed up and I'm sorry and I want to fix this, and, please help me, because clearly I don't know how to fix this, and I've been trying for like 8 hours. And I think like, having that humility and being honest is, beneficial. Like, admit, like, especially, when you're in your 20s and stuff. I'm 30 now, but when you're in your 20s, there's this fear of not wanting to admit you don't know something because you don't want to look, uninformed or anything. And so you just kind of fake it till you make it. But there are some things you can't really fake like that. And so I think as you get older, you get more comfortable with the fact with just saying, I don't know, or this is not an area I'm familiar in, but I want to learn.
All right. Well, as we come to the end here, I wanted to ask you maybe the most important thing. What are you working on? You are a game dev as well as being a consultant and reader for other folks' games. So what are the things that you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on a number of projects. In the most relevant as we approach the spooky season in the spooky month of October is that my latest game, Pelagos, is ready for playtesting. Pelagos is a game about grief, death, and the afterlife, where you play as a lantern keeper who travels into the Sea of Dreams in order to encounter sea ghosts. Lantern keepers are basically like underwater paranormal investigators. So very spooky, very kind of creepy or underwater, that sort of thing.
That's amazing.
So I've been getting a lot of good feedback. So shout out to all the people who've been helping me with that. And the reception to Pelagos has honestly been so surprising because, as I said, I don't really do horror, but this just kind of developed as a sort of like way for me to sort of process my own grief and the loss of my mother and everything, and also my unending fear of deep water, the ocean, and what dwells in there. Because
no, it's a real fear. I feel like every time I'm out in any, it doesn't even have to be like the ocean or whatever. Anytime I just cannot see the bottom of whatever thing of water I'm in, I'm like, there is absolutely something underneath me that's about just to like swallow me up.
Definitely. Especially because recently I saw a tweet about how deep in the pelagic zone they encountered a fish with a translucent head, and I was just like, well, we could just leave that where we found it and then not go back to the like.
Yeah, we don't. Let's just not touch that.
Although part of me was like, I wonder if it's good eats. Would it taste good?
Yeah, it's like, ooh, I just, it's like the classic human thing of like, yeah, that's scary, but like, what if I put it in my mouth just a little bit?
Yeah,
see if it's tasty.
just a little bit. But yes, that's one of the games I'm working on. That should be out in October, so I'm hoping to get playtesting done this month. I've already gotten a few people, but I'm always open to more playtesters.
And and if people really want to jump on board and help with that play testing, I think you've already sent me a link, so that will be in the show notes. But is there anywhere else that they can find it if they are having trouble with that way to get to the play test?
Generally speaking, if you follow me on Twitter, I'm usually tweeting about it. I'm working on setting up a newsletter. I do have a link for people to subscribe, and once I get that first issue out, the link to the playtest forum will be there as well. I'm trying to make sure that it's propagated through a couple of different places so people don't have to hopefully catch a tweet from me or be in the same Discord server. I'm like, I am terminally online, but there are some hours when I'm asleep.
And we want to respect those. So, and while that is amazing and cool, it is not the only thing that you've done or are even working on right now. If our previous conversations have are correct, because I know that you were telling me about, and it still lives with me in a very like a place in the back of my brain that I want to play it so bad. But it's Don't Touch the Cat. Is that still available?
Yes, You Cannot Pet the Cat is still available.
Yes.
Yeah, the amount of people who really love You Cannot Pet the Cat is pretty great.
Can you run us through just the basic idea behind it? Because it's so funny, and it's so, like, I think so relatable.
Yeah, it's entirely based off my own life experiences as someone who is allergic to pretty much every pet. But it's a 2-player game. One player is the friend who's agreed to pet sit for a friend, but they're allergic to animals, while the second player is Mixed Cuddles, which is the cat who demands to be petted and is just not happy to be watched by this strange usurper. So you go through and just sort of, it's very roleplay heavy. There are events, sometimes the cat will, decide to mess with the furniture, your friend's priceless sweater, or maybe they decide to not use the litter box, and so it's sort of this bit of a race between, can you resist petting the cat and successfully pet sit, or do you, succumb to how cute the cat looks, and now you have to spend the rest of the evening rubbing yourself with antihistamine cream.
Amazing.
Because I have certainly been there where I think, no, it'll be fine. I'll just give it one gentle rub. And then I spend the rest of the evening while everyone else is fawning over the cat, applying, antihistamine cream up to my elbow, thinking to myself, no, this I should have resisted. So that is available on my itch page.
Amazing. And there'll also be a link to that in the show notes as well. What other projects are you interested in or that you're doing? Where else can people find some stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, so also on my itch page is my one-page solo RPG Rancher's Romance, but as of this moment, its expanded sort of spiritual successor / sequel, Rancher's Respite Call of Nature, is also available for playtesting. This one just completely expands out the game. In addition to being able to play as the reclusive rancher from the first game, you could now also play as the newcomer who was referenced in the first game. And it is, at a minimum, because you need a GM, which is the narrator in this case, it's minimum 2 players, but you can, through some variant, add more people, probably 4, possibly 5. It depends on how well you're good at being a GM, where both the newcomer and the rancher have their own goals and backstories. This is the game that has a sleepiness mechanic where if you get a nat 1, if you roll a 1 while trying to do a skill, you'll gain a point of sleepiness. And if it reaches 10, you fall asleep for a while. And so basically, when I expanded this out, it really leads to more narrative decisions. What happens while you're asleep? Do you gain more suspicion, less suspicion? Is there more solidarity? What are the townsfolk doing?
Yeah.
I've also created templates for the town that GMs can use. It can be a high suspicion town. We don't take kindly to strangers here.
Right.
It could be a high solidarity town where everyone pitches in and they're more than happy to help newcomers. And then I also made one version where it's just all night creatures, because that is sort of the conceit with the reclusive rancher and why they're reclusive. They're a night creature, a supernatural being that other people should know about. But in that version of the town, everyone but the newcomer is a night creature. So you can sort of, if you're playing the newcomer, try to navigate that space. And I designed it entirely as a reference to the fact that, as a black person, as a person of color, frequently when designing games and doing anything, honestly, there's always that person who's like, well, if you don't like X, make your own. And that's basically the impetus behind the night creature town. You said you didn't want us here, so we made our own town, and we're not actually too keen on anyone really showing up that's going to cause trouble or cause problems. So, I'm interested to see what people will do with that sort of setting. And the newcomer themselves, they also have 3 archetypes based off of the romance novels that my mom would read, specifically the cowboy werewolf novels.
Yeah.
There's one version where you're a journalist, a sleep-deprived journalist. There's one where you're a weary defendant, and then there's the exhausted hunter.
Nice.
So each of them sort of plays to that sort of romance trope. So
and in our a previous conversation we had, you were telling me that you are kind of like an expert at this because your mom was so passionate about these that there was like shelves, like bookshelves full of these novels that she wouldn't allow you to like get rid of or donate or anything, but she was like, I want to read these again.
Yeah, my mom had literal bins of romance novels, but the majority of those bins were devoted to cowboy werewolves. A subsect of cowboy romance that I did not realize was so prolific and varied. So many shirtless cowboys.
Yeah.
We just kept finding bin after bin after bin. So many books that, as we were cleaning out her apartment, they did get donated. So I hope someone stumbles upon the treasure trove of romance novels and things. Boy, what a find. Because I did try to give one of them to my friend who was helping, and she was just like, no, absolutely not. I'm good.
Yeah, someday you're going to be like watching Antiques Roadshow or something, and they're going to be like, what an amazing find. Someone brought in 200 of the rarest like cowboy romance novels I've ever seen.
The few pages that I would like sometimes read as I was sorting them or while my mom wasn't looking, to be fair, were pretty spicy, so I was never allowed to read them. I was like, Mom, I'm just trying to figure out the logistics, and she'd be like, stop reading those. Those are for Mommy. Those are Mommy's books. If you want to read a romance novel, you can start with this one. There's less in here. And I'm like, less of what? And she's like, there's just less.
just it's a lesser version.
It's a tamer version, more subtle. And I'm like, okay, well, as long as it makes you happy.
Right.
So, so I'm excited for that. There's no release date yet for Rancher's Respite. I'm not sure. Might be November, might be December. Depends on how the development of Pelagos goes. And then the third game that I'm working on, and I've still been looking for playtesters for that as well, but it doesn't have a release date either, is Ostbrika, which is inspired by Swedengate, where, for people who weren't on Twitter when that happened, a lot of Swedish people just felt the need to tell people that they don't feed their guests when they come over, which is so bizarre to me, both living in the South and being black. Like, if you go over to a southern person's house and they don't offer you anything, then you've either broken in or they hate you. Like, but not even that, because even your worst enemy will still get a glass of tea. It might not, like, you might not get anything to go with that tea, and you'll be subtly moved out the door, but you're not gonna...
I was talking to my partner about this, and she was like, what are you talking about? Who would do that? Like, who wouldn't give anything to their guests?
Just the idea of just like you as a guest standing there while everyone else eats. So that's basically the central theme of the game: inhospitality versus hospitality, food, chaos. As one of the game variants, you can play as an animal that has shown up to the event, and and unless an event happens, nobody actually knows that you're an animal. It's kind of like a oh gosh, what is the name of that game where that guy's an octopus and has like a wife and kids?
Yeah.
It's like that, where it's just like, can't all of you tell that this is an octopus? And it's like, yeah, no, just go mow the lawn, honey. So it's very high chaos from like the feedback I've gotten from other people. So I'm very excited, and hopefully hoping for to get some feedback and some more playtesters for that, so I can get that released. In terms of other games I'm working on, I know we had talked previously, and then I accidentally spoiled the entire game, so I'm like, well, I'm glad that version won't see the light of day. I'm working on a game that is set in ancient Greece and will involve ancient Greek, and that is all I will say on it, so I do not spoil the game again. It doesn't have a title at the moment because I'm working on a few other things as well. I've got a few like games kind of rattling around in there. There's that one. There's one I want to make about face blindness because I have that. And then there's also a board game, possibly tabletop RPG. I'm still feeling it out because I haven't worked on it again. I think it'll be a board game called Barely Awake, where you play as a bear trying to essentially break into a house to find a comfortable spot to sleep instead of sleeping in the woods. And so you can play as a bear, or you can play as a human trying to prove that there is a bear in this house and then get the bear out of the house. So I'm very excited.
For our audience that like I've either taken a look at or I've ran some of like almost all of these games I've at least looked at, and just as a designer, I think like a touch point for everyone, if they're like, what kind of game am I getting into with Basil's design? And it's always high chaos, really fun, and like the most like strange concept that you're like how did someone like come up with that, but also immediately relatable. So I'm like, everyone should just take a look, play test. It's like they're all very, very fun. It's worth everyone's time.
Thank you. The aesthetic I try to go for as a human being is peak goblin hours. So and then so I really try to embody that chaotic energy.
Truly. And if people want to reach out to you to hire you with your consulting side of like having you read for a game that they're developing or any of that kind of stuff, where can they find you for that? I know that we've talked about the Twitter, and I'll have you drop that handle again, but you also have your website, so how can people get in touch with you if they're looking for those services?
Yeah, so there's a couple of places. Again, my Twitter at Kana has it has my email address in there. It has a link to my portfolio, and my website, towerofbasil.com, has a page dedicated to my sensitivity consultation services. I actually just today updated the profile image, so now it is gayer than ever, both of the images. So if you check out my website, I decided to update them to more accurately reflect my gay, chaotic energy, and I'm very happy with how it looks.
Yeah, I took a spin through today. It looks great, and just congratulations on all of the different things you're working on. If I was that busy, I think I would pass out.
Yeah, the joy of my particular ADHD brain is just like I need constant stimulation. Like my sibling, I guess, sort of, manages that by having a bajillion tabs. But instead, I manage that by having a bajillion projects, but then also being subscribed to, like, I don't know, no less than 30 webcomics. So any given day, something is happening that I can go look at.
Yeah. I guess on that topic, and right before we close out, are there any artists or game devs or anyone that you've been following recently that you're like, this person rocks, like people should pay attention to them?
Yeah, so I would be remiss if I didn't shout out one of my favorite artist friends, Birdie Blake, um, whose handle on Twitter is unfortunately escaping me, but they have a webcomic, which, of course, the name of, okay, it's the Magical Freelancers Guild. Um, and,
Amazing.
Birdie, they've been such a cool friend. We met in a Discord server. They actually drew me a new profile image for Discord. It's so cute. I have a little mushroom hat on, and it's entirely my style. So it's a lot of fun. I love talking to Birdie. And then also someone who has been helping me from the very beginning to give feedback on pretty much any game I've ever made, Ennio, whose Twitter handle I believe is at Ennio_RPG. But he's been great, and they've helped me out a lot. And then in terms of games that I'm excited for, that I actually remembered to wish list on Steam this time, one of them is Spirit Swap. It's a match 3 lo-fi hip-hop game. Definitely excited for that to come out. Validate Singles in Your Area. That is coming out this month, I believe. And I'm excited for that because I love dating sims, visual novels. I know I had talked about that before, how, I pretty much play any dating sim that's out there, like the Grunkle Stan dating sim. Which I say Grunkle Stan, but you can also date his brother.
Yeah.
I did that too. The path was a little confusing sometimes, but I was like, I am determined to get the perfect score on both of these Grunkles.
Yeah, if you want to go for a higher achieving Grunkle, the option is there.
It's like Ford is also there if you wanna go the turbo nerd route. Speaking of dating sims, another one, Our Life Beginning and Always. All of the DLC is just about out except for 2 of the other romanceables, but you can romance the main person. The wedding DLC is out. Still have not played that yet. Need to. Very excited. What other games? They were going to have a Kickstarter in October, but it's been moved to next year. But definitely keep an eye out for All the Witches, which is a tabletop RPG where you get to play as a witch, and they're dealing with like corruption and everything. The entire premise sounds so fascinating. They've been announcing all the people on the team, and it's just been like a cool band of people.
One of our co-hosts is like really just really loves that kind of idea of stuff, because he really wants to run a game. He calls it Oops All Warlocks, but it's just a bunch of like nuns that have run away and have instead become a coven of witches. And I'm very excited for that too, so it'll be right up his alley.
That sounds like so much fun, honestly. But yeah, there's so many games and cool things coming out that we'd probably be here forever talking about all of them. I'm trying to think of any other ones have really
And it's no worries if you can't think of more, because I'm almost 100% sure we'll have you back on sometime, either when you release one of your next projects or to talk to you again about another topic. I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on. This has been such an interesting conversation. I think that this side of the industry is just totally not really known about, or it is overlooked in so many ways. So thank you for coming on and telling us a little bit about what you do and all of the games that you're developing, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, I was happy to be on and happy to, have this experience and be able to chat with you about all sorts of things. And I would definitely, be down to come back on the show and talk about other stuff.
Honestly, we should just have like a Resident Evil retrospective at some point, because we were deep diving into it.
I would be so down for that. Although definitely Resident Evil 7 would just be me going, Ethan, no, Ethan, why? Don't touch that. It's clear he does not have a mold allergy, because just getting close enough to that house would send me into an asthma attack.
I know. It's like, man, and also his, preservation instincts are very low.
No, it's like let's go into this room that's clearly a saw trap. oh
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
now I have to figure out how to get out. It's like, stop touching things. There's a stick right there. Don't use your hand.
Yeah, it turns out that like the biggest underlooked factor in the Saw movies was that it was almost unavoidable. No one would have known that they were in a trap that was like hanging off of their head unless Jigsaw was like, "Hey, I'm about to try to kill you."
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon, Basil. Thank you for coming on Tabletop.
Yeah.
All right, see ya.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tabletopped. This show is available wherever you find your podcasts. Tabletopped is supported by our amazing sponsors and listeners like you. Check out our website at tabletoppedpod.com for links to our Patreon if you want to support us financially, and our Discord server, which is totally free and a way for you to talk with the community as well as the hosts of Tabletopped. You can also find upcoming episodes and guest details on our website, so feel free to swing by and check it out. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Tabletopped, and everybody, if you could do a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, it helps the show find its audience, and I am forever grateful. Thanks everyone for listening to another episode, and have a great week.